So let's say I wanted to solve the problem of racism forever. And I wanted to abolish racism so that people don't have to face these types of injustices ever again. How would I go about doing that? Well, the first thing I would have to do is I would have to realize that racism is not the cause of all of society's problems, but racism is a symptom of all of society's problems. It's a systemic problem. So the problem isn't the racists. The problem is a dysfunctional system which creates racist people. And it's actually a lot more complicated and complex than it seems, because as you can imagine, an entire society is a very complex system. And if you want to make any lasting change in a system, you have to study the system and understand how it works. So it's kind of like if I was driving a car and all of a sudden some black smoke started coming out of my tail end. So in this analogy, the car represents society and the black smoke represents the problem. So in this case, it's racism. So I'm driving my car and all of a sudden some black smoke starts coming out of the tail end of my car, and I pull over and get out of my car to investigate the problem, and I see that my engine's creating black smoke and there's no way that I'm going to be able to drive properly as long as this problem persists. So there's two ways that I can solve this problem. The first way is that I can start yelling at the black smoke, and I can get very angry and worked up at the black smoke. And I can start to criticize the black smoke. I can demonize the black smoke. I can become anti-black smoke. And I can write signs and protest against black smoke. So that's one way I can go about fixing the problem. I don't know if that way is going to work well or not. It sounds kind of absurd, but we can try it if we want. It might work, it might not. Now, there's an alternative way. The second way you can try solving this problem is by going under the hood of your car and actually checking to see how an engine works. Now, car engines are very complicated things in the same way entire societies are very complicated things. Me personally, I don't actually understand how car engines work. I'm not a mechanic. I haven't studied it very much. So if I wanted to fix the black smoke, I would have to call a mechanic and I would have to actually understand how car engines work. Now, if I want to solve the problem, I would have to do it from a place of humbleness and realizing that I don't know how car engines work, so I gotta call an expert. I gotta study the problem myself. But let's say I was very angry. Let's say I was very disgusted. Let's say I hated the black smoke so much that it emotionally triggered me. So now I'm going to try and solve the problem of my car engine with a big sledgehammer. And I'm going to get a big sledgehammer and I'm going to beat the crap out of my car's engine. Now, I'm not saying this is a good or bad reaction. I'm just saying this is an ineffective reaction because my car's black smoke problem isn't going to be fixed with the sledgehammer, but actually a bunch of new problems are going to be created. So let's start to understand why racism exists and how it's rooted very deeply in human psychology and why we shouldn't be criticizing or demonizing people for being racist, but instead we should be trying to understand why it works so that we can actually prevent it. So let's drink some water first. Water's good. Let me go for another swig. Okay. So the first thing we have to realize when we're understanding what racism is and where it comes from is we have to see that developed countries are a lot less racist than developing countries. So if you live in Canada or the USA or a developed country, notice that we are one of the least racist countries on the entire planet. Now, I'm not saying that there is no racism, and I'm not saying that there can't be less racism, and I'm not trying to say that many lives aren't ruined by racism in Canada, because it is a serious problem. There is systematic oppression of minorities, and people have a good reason to be angry. So I'm not trying to take away from any of that. But I am saying that we do have some of the least amounts of racism in the entire world. Now, why is this the case? This is very interesting. So if you were to go to Somalia or the Middle East, you would notice that there is actually a lot more racism. Now, why is this the case? Well, the reason why is these countries are less developed. They have less infrastructure, and they have much more harsh survival conditions. So if you were to live in Somalia, you would constantly be living in a state of fear, because there's gangs, there's warlords that are going to come and rape your family and kill your children and steal all of your possessions. Life in Somalia is crap. They don't have toilets. You have to shit on the floor. That causes diseases. Everyone is on drugs. It's a very terrible and corrupted place to live, and it really sucks to live there. The life conditions are very harsh. So as a survival strategy, what someone might do in Somalia is what the human mind naturally does, is it becomes tribalistic, and it relies a lot on their family, their ethnic culture for survival. So if I lived in Somalia, I would have a lot deeper connection to my ethnic background, a lot deeper connection to my individual family, because that's how I'm going to survive. We help each other survive. And the problem with this is that this is tribalism. So now each family, each ethnic group forms its own little identity, forms its own little tribe, and becomes racist against the other tribes, because the other tribes are a threat. They're an actual threat. So the other tribes might actually come into your tribe and enslave your people and rape your women. And we don't want that to happen. So we have to become separatist. We have to separate ourselves from the other races. So let's say I'm a certain tribe in Somalia. I have to separate myself from the other tribes. And I have to demonize the other tribes. I have to actually think that they're bad, so that I can ward them off, so that I can protect my family. So the reason why I'm explaining this is because if you study human psychology and developmental psychology, and you start to take a very big picture perspective, you realize that when survival conditions are harsh, racism is actually beneficial for that group. So it's actually a survival strategy for you to be racist if you live in a place where your survival conditions are very harsh. So if I lived in the Middle East, for example, I don't have the luxury of accepting every single human being as equal. I don't have that luxury. Because if I do that, if I see every human being as equal, then what will happen is, first of all, my family, my group, let's say I'm Jewish, my Jewish group, if I try and tell my Jewish friends, hey, you know, the Arabians, they're equal to us. They're just as equal. That doesn't fly. You will actually be kicked out of your family, and you can't survive without the family, so you'll be killed. So it's in your own survival benefit to be a racist, because then you'll be accepted by your family. So again, the bigger point I'm trying to make here is that when survival conditions are harsh, racism is actually a favorable trait and will actually help you survive in these harsh survival conditions. Now, harsh survival conditions, they create a lot of fear in the human being. So you're constantly living in fear. And this is a lower state of consciousness. When you're constantly in fear, you reside in lower states of consciousness. Now, and wherever there is low consciousness, there is naturally racism, because racism is separatism. It's fear-based, fear of other. So when things are separate from you, you're constantly scared. And the point is that low consciousness comes with racism. That's how it works. So now, let's talk about how to raise consciousness. Because if we can raise consciousness in the West, so you live in Canada, the racist people only exist because there is a difficulty to meet basic needs. As a nation, we don't make it very easy for people to solve their basic needs. Many people there's a massive B right there, so that kind of distracted me. Many people have to work 2 jobs, minimum wage jobs, in order for them to feed their family and kids. And when you're constantly worried about making ends meet, then you have no time and no energy to develop higher levels of consciousness, which include anti-racism movements or accepting everyone as equal. So imagine yourself as a police officer that has to constantly deal with crime and all that stuff. So imagine I'm a white police officer that lives in a predominantly black neighborhood. Now, especially in the US, these neighborhoods tend to be more poor, not because the people are black, but because there has been a lot of systematic racism in the past. So we've already set these people up for failure. So also in the US, the schools are funded based on the amount of wealth in relative to the area that the school is in. So the schools in the richer areas have a much higher quality of education than the schools that are in the poorer areas. Now, of course, you know that I'm a champion of education and understanding. So what do you think happens when the poorer area has a lower quality school? When people are less educated, then they're more likely to resort to crime, drugs, gang violence, and all that kind of stuff. So as a white cop, I'm constantly seeing black people commit crime and fight with each other. There's gang warfare and all that stuff. And as a white cop, I'm constantly in fear. I'm scared for my life. Constantly. I spend 10, 20 years on duty, constantly worried about crime that is being predominantly committed by black people. Not all the time. Of course, there's white people commit crime, of course. But I'm just saying, in a black neighborhood, mostly black people are going to be committing crime. So, I'm constantly scared. I'm constantly in a state of fear. And it's natural for me to develop racist tendencies, to develop racist types of thinking. Because you're constantly seeing black people on crack, on heroin. Of course, it's not the black person's fault. It's a systemic problem. It's not the fault of their ethnicity. It's not their fault. It's the whole system's fault. It's the whole country's fault. It's a fault of human psychology and a lack of understanding of it. So the reason why I'm talking about this is because when we as a country make it easier for the poorest people to solve their basic needs, so stuff like free healthcare, stuff like affordable tuition, when we invest in our education system instead of cutting our education system, when we invest into it and make it serious. Because when I was going to school, it was like a joke. They were teaching me stuff that I felt like they were insulting my intelligence because they were teaching me very low quality stuff. But if we actually invest in our education, if we make it easier for families to have access to affordable daycare and stuff like that, there's a lot of systemic problems. But what the main point here is that if we make it easier for poor people, middle class people, to solve their basic needs, to have a house and to have food in their stomach, then they might not have to work 2 or 3 jobs in order to make ends meet. Then, when people don't have to work 2 or 3 jobs, then they have more time and energy on their hands to actually personally develop themselves. They aren't constantly living in a state of fear, in a state of lack. But now these people are able to actually participate in extracurricular activities. These people are able to develop themselves, practice yoga, practice meditation. And now what's happening is the general consciousness, the state of consciousness of the masses, the collective consciousness is rising. Now, once we are able to solve the basic needs of the masses, so an example of this would be, not to get too political, but this is a political problem. Someone like Bernie Sanders, for example, would have implemented a lot of these policies that would help solve the basic needs of the masses. So when we do that, when we vote for these type of people, again, this isn't a political video. This is a systemic video. I'm trying to make you understand how systems work. When we help solve the basic needs of the masses, then the collective consciousness is going to raise, and as a result, people aren't always living in fear and in lack and in poverty, and as a result, there is no more need for racist type thinking. People who are racist, they will become like dinosaurs. They won't need to exist anymore. But in a lot of places, especially in the US, there is a lot of poverty. There's a lot of systematic oppression of minorities. A lot of minorities don't have access to education. They don't have access to jobs. So they are constantly struggling to make ends meet. So these minorities are going to be less educated. They're going to commit more crime. Right? And then the white person, right? Let's say the person who is not a minority, this person is going to develop some type of racist ideology because their whole life they see Mexicans, let's say, or they see black people committing crime constantly. Again, not the black people's fault, but this is what the white person is seeing constantly as a result of a system that isn't functioning well for its people. Because in our current system, all of the money, all of the resources are being funneled to the top so that the rich people keep all the resources at the top and very little of it is coming down to the masses, basically. A lot of people will call this communism, but this isn't communism. This is socialism. This is government for the people. Right? So what can you do about it? What can you do to help this besides posting angry Instagram stories? So what you can do to help this situation, believe it or not, is not rioting and marching and yelling, "Stop racism," because that's not how racism stops. The way racism stops first is by you coming to terms with the fact that racism exists. It's real and it sucks. Now we've come to terms that we don't hate racist people. You shouldn't be hating racist people. You should be trying to understand human psychology. What is racism? Where does it come from? Why does it exist? Why is it necessary at lower levels of consciousness? Right? So now you're understanding that. And now also, you have to be working on your own personal development, because if you are not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. So how are you working every single day to raise your own consciousness? How are you becoming a more intelligent and wise individual? How are you becoming a more emotionally mature person? What are you doing? And also, how are you sharing that with others? What kind of example are you setting for others? What kind of art are you sharing with the world? Are you going to work at McDonald's 9 to 5 and because that is the only value you can add to society? Or are you personally developing yourself, and are you working on influencing the collective consciousness in a positive way? Are you working at some marketing company where you're a marketer for Pepsi, where you're selling poison to people? Or are you maybe creating some art? Or are you maybe in some type of egalitarian, is that the word, egalitarian movement, where you're actually helping the masses, you're helping people with their problems by first and foremost transforming yourself into a vehicle of higher consciousness values, such as equality, peace, love, acceptance, creativity, all that stuff. If you want equality, then you have to give equality to everyone. You can't. So racism, what it is it's hatred. It's hatred towards a certain race, hatred towards a certain group of people, right? But what a lot of people have done is they've taken that hatred and they've actually now they hate racist people. So what they've done is they've changed the content of their hatred. So racist people hate black people, let's say, right? Or white people. But now people who are anti-racist hate racist people. So the content of your hatred has changed, but there is still hatred in your heart. And as long as there's hatred in your heart, you can't set an example. You can't elevate your own consciousness, and by association, you can't elevate the consciousness of mankind, because you're operating from a place of hatred and fear and separation. Regardless of who you hate, I don't care if you hate racist people. That's not very noble. What's even more noble is to love racist people, not because I like racism, not because I support racism, but because I understand racism. I want to fix it through understanding, through compassion. I want to actually change the system instead of alienating groups of people, right? So he who sees evil in the world creates evil. So if I think racist people are evil, what I might do something rash. Maybe I'll beat a cop up. Maybe I'll find a cop and I'll beat them up. Now what I'm doing is I'm creating more evil. And the reason why is because I'm seeing evil in the world. So that was a kind of a ranty style video. I'm all done here basically. Basically, the answer, the way you solve racism is first, realize that it's not going to be solved in your lifetime. And it might not even be solved in your kids' lifetimes, because there are other countries in the world that are nowhere near as developed as Canada, and they still have tons of their own societal problems to deal with. So what you can do is you can focus on your own personal development, which is why that's all I talk about on this channel. So if you like this video, give it a like, subscribe. I got more deep videos like this coming out. So let me know if you like this video. Let me know if you disagree with what I'm saying in the comments. I would love to have a friendly discussion. Thank you so much for listening. Check out my playlists and my videos, and I'll see you in the next one.